Are you asking the question, where's my stuff, too often? Whether it's in your own warehouses, from your suppliers, or in your customer network, if you're not sure where your stuff is, then Surge Air has the solution for you. With Surge Air's 99.9% accuracy, you're getting more than just supply chain visibility. You're getting the ability to orchestrate your supply chain and guide decisions in real time. Reduce the chaos in your supply chain and find operational truth with Surge Air. Find your visibility and learn more at surgeair.com. That's surgeair.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. And on today's episode, I am going to be joined by Jason Griswold, and he is an application engineer manager at Daifuku Intralogistics America. And we are going to learn a little bit about Daifuku. We're going to learn about their automation offerings, and we're going to talk about how to bring automation into your operation, but keep that operation flexible still. And Jason's going to share a project that they did with Peterbilt around that and how that kind of came about. So very interested to dig into this because I think, remaining flexible is such a key thing within an operation, but we need that automation to be able to create better efficiencies and do more with our operation. So very interested to hear his thoughts and how they kind of approach this and be able to bring this into operation. So Jason, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing well. Thanks, Kevin.
Yeah, great to get you on. Great to talk about Daifuku here on the show as well. First time we've had them on, so very interested to dig in a little further. So why don't we start there? Why don't you give us kind of a brief overview of Daifuku and what it is that you do and some of the offerings that you do as well.
So Daifuku, we are an OEM for material handling equipment. So it means our full catalog is anywhere from pallet handling equipment, so what you typically hear like maybe unit loads, pallet conveyors, AGVs, things like that, down to like the case level and unit handling level. So case level, you would see like obviously case conveyor, mini loads, shuttles, and AMRs, and then some of the newer offerings too, like four-way shuttles, which is some of the things that you would see maybe at ProMat or any of the trade shows. We manufacture all of that stuff, conveyor. We manufacture it at our Hobart facility in Indiana. A lot of the more high-level automation, the unit loads and mini loads and shuttles, we manufacture out of our Shiga factory in Japan.
Interesting. And a lot of different options there, right? And a lot of different offerings as well. So I'm curious with, that kind of array of offerings and seeing, what's happening in the industry as well. What do you think is kind of, or what's your view, I guess, on the industry right now, and where are we in terms of automation adoption, and what's the general feeling? Like you mentioned ProMat, right? Obviously tons of people are going there, and there's tons of automation and robotics happening there now, right? I talked to somebody yesterday, and many people, I'm sure you've heard this too, like ProMat has kind of turned into a robotic show almost, right? In a sense, right? So what's your take as you're out there in the field and engaging with people? What is really like the climate around automation? Like, what do people feel about it right now?
It feels like when we're talking to customers, there's a lot of customers that are really entrenched in automation. So you've got, Amazons and Walmarts and companies that have been doing automation for a very long time, and they're fairly sophisticated in it. maybe fairly is underselling it. They're very sophisticated in what they do because they've done it for, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects. They've, even billions of dollars worth of projects. So they've been doing this a long time. They have a general idea of maybe what they want. You consult with them to arrive at a solution that works best for the particular application they're looking at. But, they have a very good knowledge base to work on. You have other customers who are maybe just barely stepping into their journey for automation where, they might have something there in the warehouse, or they run a fully manual warehouse. And so they have maybe heard about automation, or they've seen something. And so they might have seen at a different warehouse or facility some AMRs or some AGVs. And so they have questions. They come to you and they talk to you and say, hey, we've got this operation. We're thinking maybe let's put some AGVs in here, or let's put in a specific technology. And they start with maybe some preconceived notions of what they think would work well for them. And so you act more as like a consultant and guide to help them learn about automation, understand automation. And then in those cases, you're really deep diving into what they do and what they think they want to do with automation in their particular use case, so that you can help them really arrive at what works best for them.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think it's an interesting scenario you described there, where, they see somebody else maybe has an AMR or AGV, as you mentioned, in their operation, and they think that, maybe they should get something right, and maybe they have an application for that. So I'm curious along those lines. I mean, how many times have you seen, or is it frequent, I guess maybe is the question, where that type of scenario happens and they're like, oh, I should go after this too. But when you really kind of evaluate their operation, maybe they should be starting in a different direction.
So a big part of that, you have to, sometimes have blunt conversations with them where they'll see something and I'll say, hey, we think we want to do that. And, maybe the physical thing that they're handling is the same as what they saw, but their use is different. So they saw something that picks the case up and it brings it to a location, and an operator takes it and, stacks a pallet, is building a pallet. But what they want to use it for is they have a thing that they need to get out of a case. And so instead of picking at a case level, they might be picking at a unit level. And so, they have more, whether it's their SKU profile is different or their picking profile is different. It seems the same to them maybe, but how they want to use it, or really what they're trying to do with it, is different enough that technology just doesn't work well. And so, that really happens pretty frequently. And so that's why it's really important to understand, not to just hear them say yeah, I can give you an AGV solution, or I can give you a mini load or a shuttle or a unit load solution, but really talk to them, maybe do some site visits, sit down with their operations people, get some data from them so that we can do, analyze the data and figure out, do they have a lot of seasonality? Are we looking at and capturing everything that we need to, so that we can help them design the best solution for them? And then on top of that is the other blunt conversation you have to have with them is, sometimes talk about capital expenditure for a project. They look and they're like, oh yeah, we'd like to do a shuttle. It's like, all right, well, do you have, depending on how much they want to do you have millions of dollars? Do you have $10 million to put towards this? And they're like, well, no, we wanted something in the $1 to $2 million range. It's like, okay, we can work around that. We can work around whatever your budget is. We just have to have that conversation before we get too far down the road.
Yeah. I think that's really interesting because, and I think the operations are so different, from each other, even though we're all moving boxes, right, at the end of the day, but there's still lots of different nuances in between. Could be product type, could be the customers they serve and the requirements and the facility itself and all these different things, right? It's not at that point where it's oh, I saw my neighbor got a a new Jeep, right? I actually kind of want a Jeep too, so I'm going to go to the dealer and just get a Jeep, right? It's not that same kind of thing, right? Like you said, there's all this data and analysis that needs to go into like what is actually the right solution for your particular application to figure that out. So when we look at automation, right, an operation, as I just mentioned, right, has these nuances, has these different things that are happening, and things change, right? And so there needs to be flexibility as well. But in some automation solutions, there's maybe some perception there that maybe they're a little more rigid, right? Or they're built for like a particular use case, and then they can't have that flexibility as well. So how do you approach automation solutions with being able to help those operations still maintain flexibility when they need to have flexibility?
There's a couple things that go into that. One is, again, going back to it, you need to understand what the customer's operation is. You need to understand, if the customer is planning on, growing into a certain sector. So one example I'll give is we've talked to customers who they are picking units and they're sending them to stores. So when we talk about, shuttles and some of those technologies, the way that you would potentially design a system is different if you can do, like, let's say some batch picking, where you bring a SKU out and you pick to a couple different stores, right? So you open some store orders, and then you have an operator and they can take a SKU and then pick to a couple different stores and fulfill a couple different orders from bringing out one SKU of something. But then you talk to the customer and they're like, oh yeah, and also, by the way, we want to be able to get into e-commerce and deliver more e-commerce out of this facility as well. Well, the way that you might set up a station to pick for an e-commerce order is potentially different, because instead of, a store, they may get, 6 of a specific SKU. And so you've got an operator and they've got to, pick and then do some maybe value-added services where they've got to like rebag something, or, put some information in with what they're picking to an order. Now you're doing e-commerce. And so the customer's not usually buying like 6 of the same t-shirt, right? They have like 1 or 2 things that they're going to get from somebody. And so they bring out that SKU, they pick their one thing, and then they've got to, box up the order and then send it out. And so the way that those stations operate is just fundamentally different. So if you don't know that the customer wants to do something in the future and at least has a plan for it, you could design automation for them, and then 5 years down the road, they're like, well, this actually doesn't work like we wanted it to, because we're trying to do this thing that we didn't plan for.
I think that's such a great point, right? It's like, how do you, and I talked to somebody recently about this, and, they're a 3PL, right? And they're like, it's very hard for us to work around automation solutions because, our contracts with clients are, 2 years, 3 years. And how do we get an automation solution that can go, multiple clients be fit into that, but then also, we'll have ROI prior to that contract actually going out. And I think that's a great point. Like you said, we put in the solution, and 5 years from now, it's not actually giving us like what we wanted, because now things have shifted a little bit. And I think, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. I mean, I think when it comes to like, a more giant like retailer or something like that, like maybe there's a little more predictability there, and versus like a 3PL scenario, what that's going to look like. But even in that case, right, I mean, there's like shifting things where even if it's like a product line, a dedicated manufacturer, like they also change, and their consumers change too, and like what they're expecting. And maybe it's all small items right now, but 3 years from now, somebody in marketing or product development gets a great idea to make a larger item, right? And now that's like totally shifting the way the operation is going to function and work. I mean, I worked for a company where, we had large commercial lighting fixtures, and then all of a sudden they decided they wanted to release never carried light bulbs ever, and then decided they wanted to do like a 500 SKU line of light bulbs, which was very different from anything that we had worked with in the operations, which created all kinds of different nuances and things to happen there. So it's very interesting to hear that, and kind of like, how do you design that to be able to accommodate those types of shifts, or be able to expand upon it or contract it in an easy way to get through that. So tell us a little bit about the project that you did with Peterbilt, and kind of what went into that. What was the challenge that they were facing, and then how did you go about kind of solving that challenge?
Yeah. So one thing I want to address is, it's really interesting you're talking about 3PLs. First is, it's really important to understand what they're going to be doing in the future, but also, like, is the customer leasing the space, or do they own the space? Because, some customers are saying like, oh yeah, we're leasing this building. So yeah, we plan on being here for the long term, but like, if they, if their lease expires and they don't renew it and they need to move out in 10 years or something like that. If you're going to build something that has a lot of infrastructure associated with it, like a rack supported building or something where you're going to store 50,000 pallets, they're leasing the land. They leave. In order to repurpose that space, they're going to have to either find somebody that can just use the equipment as is, or they're tearing down a building. So like, understanding that is important, and kind of leads into the Peterbilt example. Peterbilt owns their facility. They were landlocked. So they had to figure out how to expand and support one of their painting lines, but they couldn't build out. So they couldn't build, something adjacent and use that. So what they decided was, well, we've got space above. So there was a lot of sort of reinforcing activity that happened, but they ended up building up. So they took like this attic space, so it's like 50-foot elevated, and then built an ASRS on top of that. So an automated storage retrieval system, where they were storing truck bodies. So like the cabs and everything like that you see running down the road, they were storing that. So they take them to a lift, elevate them 50 feet in the air, store them into this system so that they can, bring them out in whatever sequence they need so that they can feed their paint line.
So that's a pretty big ASRS then, right? A truck body. I mean, that's a big item. Yeah,
it's like almost a 20-foot load. So
wow.
About storing one of those things, it's not a trivial thing. So there was a lot of customization that went into the automated solution, and there's a lot of customization that went into preparing the area, because you think of a typical roof, you go and you put like this giant system that has these 20,000 pound cranes running up and down. You can't just store, put that up on a normal roof. You got to do a lot of reinforcement. So it was it was a very long project, and it goes into, it sort of ties back to what we talked about, is there can be a lot of infrastructure things that need to happen for certain projects. And so Peterbilt knows, hey, we're going to do these truck bodies in this facility for a long time. So them taking, I think it was about a 2.5-year project, them taking 2.5 years to build out the infrastructure that they needed so that they could do this paint line. That's something that was worth it to them. But it also goes into, talking about in, 6-7 years, their business changes. How do you help them be flexible? As just another example, they found that they've got a particular line that's called sleeper cabs. So it's the truck bodies that have basically a little sleeping quarters in them. They found that part of their business was growing much faster than they expected. And so they needed more storage for that system. And so when we built their ASRS, they had a couple aisles dedicated to normal cabs and hoods, and then an aisle that could do these sleeper cabs. And they found after about 6 or 7 years. That grew much faster than they anticipated. And so we went in and retrofit their system so that they could have 2 aisles that could handle those sleeper cabs, because they needed more storage and they needed more of those cabs to be pulled out to their paint line. So a couple of years ago, it might have been 2023 or 2024, we finished installing that. But we went and we retrofit their system so that they could now handle their changing business.
Very interesting. And I'm trying to visualize what that looks like in my head. I got to see some videos of that or something. That's pretty incredible. And because so often you talk about ASRS, right? I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is either like cases coming in and out or totes, not truck bodies, right? So I think that's pretty cool. So in the analysis part, because you mentioned they own the property, right? They own the real estate there. So obviously that was a factor in trying to figure out how to do more with that. But in the analysis of that project, I mean, was it included in the analysis? Like, what if we just built a new facility instead? Because it sounds like a lot had to go into like the infrastructure, the support of doing that. How did you do that in addition to like not disrupting like the regular operation that's still going on around it? I mean, how do you factor in all those things to make the decision to say like, okay, yeah, let's tack this on top of our building instead of like going out and just like build new while our operation is still running, and then we'll like transition over into that space?
I mean, a big part of it is understanding what space that a customer has to work with, right? So in their particular case, they looked at the land that they owned, and, when they analyzed it, they're like, all right, well, one thing that we typically do with customers is we'll do at the very beginning, as we're talking through, their needs, we'll work through what we call a block diagram, right? And that's analyzing whatever space they have. So you build out your material flow diagrams to make sure like, okay, what are they moving around? How much of that do they have to move around, right? So you're trying to think of the what. And then once you have that concept, that you think, all right, how much space does what we're talking about take, right? So kind of the next step is you'll build like maybe a block diagram and say like, okay, how much space do I need to move this stuff that we're talking about around, or store this stuff that we're talking about? And so in this case, we worked through and talked with them. All right, what stuff do we want to move? What stuff do we want to store? All right, how much space do we need to do that? And then we looked at the parcel that they had and determined, all right, well, there's not really anything that we can do cleanly that will allow us to build something new and then bring that into the paint lines in a way that doesn't like maybe cut across some of their other operations. Okay. And so that's when I talked with them and like, all right, well, we used to have this thing up in this sort of like, attic space for all intents and purposes. Yeah. Is this something that we can reuse? And then you start looking at it. Sounds kind of crazy, but then you're like, all right, well, actually we can do this. And so kind of an idea is born. Interesting.
Yeah. It's really, really incredible, like how to get creative with the space and figure that out. And I mean, I have to imagine it's pretty much, it's kind of like an engineering marvel a little bit if I'm thinking about it in the right way. I mean, to see it is probably pretty incredible. But so how do you go about doing something like that? Because, obviously there's a huge, I don't know if you call it a debate, but obviously discussion around like, doing like brownfield project like that versus like a greenfield project and disrupting operations and things like that. So how did you do? Because I imagine, the reinforcement that had to go in, was, had to go in and do some construction underneath within the existing operation. So how do you plan a project, and how do you think about that part where you're not disrupting like the operation that's pre-existing while still getting this together and making sure that, at the end of the day, when you do the go live, that everything is ending up connecting and being that flowing process that you want to happen?
I think the first thing that you really have to understand is, you got to spend time on site. Mm-hmm. So observe what's around what you want to build on, right? So right now, a lot of customers are talking about, hey, instead of building something new, we want to do a brownfield site. And so a lot of site visits looking through like, okay, this is the space we think we want. This is the operations in that area. And so then you move from that to talking with operations. So, all right, in order for us to do this, these are the steps that we have to take, right? So we've got to maybe disassemble some things, or we need to, in the case of that, we need to reinforce some things in the ceiling. In order for us to do that, what access do we need? And so luckily in Peterbilt's case, they had access basically through, the side of the building. So we were able to go up, cut an opening, up elevated, and then bring materials in through there. So we didn't have to go into the facility, disrupt operations, and then go up. We could, go in from outside, lift it up and into the space, and then do a lot of the work up there that we needed to do. So it was much less disruptive to the operation. But those are some things you have to know and understand is, not just what is inside the building, but what's around the building. Is there alternate ways we can do that? Other things with brownfield operations, you can talk about, we've got enough space to do this. Doesn't seem like a big deal. But then you start looking at, all right, well, in order to bring material to that space, do I have dock doors that I can access and then bring material in without, cutting across operations? Or, if it's like a manufacturing facility, they could have like hallways and corridors. Do I have to bring a mast for a 25-foot, 30-foot crane down a hallway? Do I have enough physical space to be able to do that? So it's not just the physical project, but how do I get stuff there so I can build what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to hear kind of that behind the scenes, right? Because I mean the project itself is the project, but then it's almost like there's another project just to figure out how to get the materials there and the prep and the setup, right, to do the work. So I guess along the lines of that conversation, brownfield versus greenfield, I mean, are you seeing in more scenarios as automation technology advances further and there's more installations being done, so there's new ways that are, I guess, maybe being discovered or uncovered to do these installations? I mean, are you seeing that sometimes that more brownfield options are becoming more viable than maybe they were a few years ago or a while ago?
I don't know if it's necessarily viability of greenfield versus brownfield. I know that as people rethink what their operations are and start looking at the ROI on certain types of automation, that's when they'll look and see we don't necessarily want to spend all the money that would be involved in building greenfield. We've got, this facility here. If we install, let's say they've got a bunch of manual racking and they're trying to reclaim space because, in the case of one of our customers recently, they have a lot of, outside storage that they're using. So they've got, they're leasing space where they, store things off site. And then when they need it, they'll, bring it on the site for the next step in the manufacturing process. And so they're leasing space. They don't want to pay that money to, not just rent the space, but also to ship things to the facility. So they look and see, all right, can we reconfigure some of our, current warehouse space so that we can stop paying that money and just have this material on site? And so you might look at a four-way pallet shuttle, which is one of the things that you saw a lot of at the most recent ProMat, where that's something that's really conducive to weird building shapes, just because of the way that it's configured. It allows you to build you've got this L shape within your building where, traditional unit load ASRS is really good for square shaped things. But maybe you've got this odd shape that you want to be able to maximize it. So you can look at, all right, do I have a pallet shuttle or something like that I can use that allows me to store more things and be flexible in how I do it?
Interesting. Yeah. I was curious about that because I think obviously talking to a lot of people in the industry, I think that's, hearing more that people are trying to see like what can they do with their existing operation, right? And how can they get more out of that space, because there's seems to be no relief on lease prices or real estate in any way, and oftentimes there is some space to go up, right? Certainly not everybody has just this attic space, right? But certainly there's some clear height there to go up a little bit and figure out some type of a more dense storage or something like that. So very interesting to hear that and kind of the perspective, and really interesting to hear about the Peterbilt project. I gotta see that. That sounds like really, really cool. But so if we look towards kind of the future, what do you see is kind of, in the next few years? I mean, what does the future of automation look like to you? And, maybe, just automation in general, but also from like Daifuku's perspective as well.
I think that it's very purposeful. So what I mean by that is not every customer needs a rack-supported building. Not every customer is going to try and store 100,000 pallets, right? So they might have, an operation, a few hundred feet away where they bring 1 or 2 pallets an hour over to this separated operation. And they don't want to have a fork truck driver, potentially running into things, or, maybe trying to make sure that people are safe from a load moving on a fork truck, a couple hundred feet away. So now you look at, all right, can I use like an AMR or an AGV or something that allows me to safely move loads or to do things that are flexible? So like an AGV or an AMR, there's not a lot of infrastructure built into that, right? So you've got a route that they follow, but those routes are configurable, right? So yeah, I need to move like 1 or 2 pallets an hour over here, but in the future, if I need to move it to a different area, we can reconfigure that route. They don't need like a full system. They need automation with a purpose, right? So it's very flexible and it has its purpose and its use case. And so I think that, with a lot of the things that we're seeing, like AMRs, they allow people to maybe have a fleet of something that can move around, that can go, into different areas. If you need more AMRs, you can add more up to a limit within that system. As your operation changes and scales, you can add more to be able to support that operation. You're still going to have the customers who are building, like I said, giant rack supported buildings or, million unit shuttle systems, because they, frankly, they are able to do that. They have the use cases for it. But I think you're seeing a lot more customers that are sort of dipping their toe into the water and having the solutions that don't require a huge lead time. So it's not a 2-year project. It's maybe a 6-month project or something like that. Allows them to introduce themselves to automation, to gain some of that familiarity so that they can start looking at, more of their operations and say, okay, well, this was successful for us. Let's look at maybe some other things.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think that that last point you had there, I think is really, really interesting, because it is kind of like, okay, you don't want to have a customer basically like, try an automation, doesn't quite work out the way they're expecting, and they end up with like a bad taste in their mouth, right? And then they're like, well, I'm not gonna do more of that right now, or maybe I'm not going to do more of that ever, right? Or something like that, right? So that's really a great thing there, and kind of goes back to like kind of some of the stuff we were talking about in the beginning too, is like making sure that like, okay, we're doing a proper analysis and making sure that they end up with the right solution that's going to give them results that they're expecting, or make an impact is what they want, right? And then how is that going to build upon with future solutions, or how do you definitely reiterate that solution to do something a little different and be flexible in that way. So very interesting insights, and really super interesting to hear about that project from you here, Jason, today as well. So really appreciate you coming on the podcast and talking to us about kind of how to remain flexible within your operation and still leverage automation, and also, just some creative ways to go about putting automation in place too as well. So if people are interested in getting in touch or learning more about Daifuku, what's the best way to do that?
Through our website, we've got links to, a lot of our projects that we've done. Customers can see what type of automation offerings we have, some of the customers' test cases and, projects that we've done, and they can kind of get a feel for what we offer.
All right, great. And we'll definitely put all that information at thenewwarehouse.com as well as in the show notes here too. So Jason, thank you once again for coming on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Enjoyed this episode? Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast, and for more content from the New Warehouse, find us on LinkedIn and YouTube. Links to subscribe can be found in the show notes, and for everything The New Warehouse, head to thenewwarehouse.com.